All right, we got Ryan, aka Cloudy. Wonder if he's able to join, or he's just popping in since I accidentally pinged everybody.
Hulk as well.
Let's see. I'm gonna invite them to speak. Cool. Well, thanks for coming, guys. Everybody in the audience. It would be cool to have Flosen on. He talked about coming on maybe in a year, so maybe in a future episode. He'll be on. Hey, Jean-Pierre. Good time of day wherever you may be. Do I sound better now? I switched to my good mic.
Sound great.
Much
You
better.
sound very in podcast mode.
Perfect. Okay. One moment here. Okay. So people in the audience, feel free to suggest talking points and ask questions. These are the suggestions that we're going to be going off of initially, but do not be shy to ask more. We're going to be talking about getting the most out of tutoring and tandem sessions, the ratios of writing versus speaking, how much output should be corrected, and cautions with practicing output.
You're cute, Flosen. I agree. Flosen boy getting some love. Concheras, ¿qué tal?
Does anyone want to start? Should we just jump into it? Is there a specific prompt?
I guess, yeah. If there's
the
a
prompts are in the...
I know, but there are many.
There are many. Where do we want to start?
Many angles to take is the thing.
So I'll start us off. The team designed an output curriculum, and we've had a couple of people in our coaching go through output, and it involves a lot of things that you can do on your own. So I know that's typical Refold, right? People are like, let's learn a language to not speak it with other people. But it involves essentially the Cliff Notes for our output are make a list of small talk questions and like talking points, things that you predict you'll have to talk about in your target language, and then practice answering them with writing, and then bringing that to a native tutor and getting feedback. Then we recommend doing things, again, that you can do on your own and then getting feedback on them sort of asynchronously. So one thing we recommend is practicing like doing reaction videos and monologuing. So if you, for example, are a huge fan of Hunter x Hunter or something, you could try to summarize it in your target language. And then whenever you need to use English, make a mental note, come back to it, and go over it with a tutor and find what the best word would be. So a lot of our output practice is actually stuff that we have you doing on your own. Speaking free conversation with a tutor is actually the very last thing we recommend doing. And we've had a couple people go through this. So we've had a couple people go through it for French, and then a couple people go through it for Japanese. I don't think we've had anybody go through it for like Spanish or Korean yet. But that's sort of what we've seen. And as far as what I can tell, it works. And the nice thing is that since you are practicing output without a partner, you can do it anytime. You're not limited to like, oh, I need to do something in Japanese time while you're over in, South America or whatever, right? Like the time zone difference can be pretty big, and that can be a barrier. Right. 1 second here. Looks like we got some questions. So how do you determine whether it works or not? So I don't have the longitudinal data on that yet, Hulk, because again, our output curriculum is only like half a year old, but I've seen people go from being very confident with their input, usually like people particularly Japanese learners. They get very comfortable like free-flowing their seasonal anime and understanding, to being very comfortable outputting. Now, given that I don't speak Japanese and I'm not in the sessions with them, I cannot say how well it works or how well it doesn't, but I can say it does wonders for their confidence when it comes to outputting, and it becomes much more natural. Fonchera says, I've heard about choosing an interview and pretending to be either the guest or the host. What do you think about that? I think that's a great idea. One of my main things that I recommend to people when they're ready to start outputting, and they've sort of passed the output techniques they can do on their own, is to go in to a session, bring like a short news article, something interesting. Japanese manages to fly by tying 50 balloons to his chair. Read it and then discuss it. That way you get the corrected reading, where they correct you on your reading while you're reading the article, and then you have a neat topic to talk about. And I think going in with an interview and pretending to be the guest or the host also works.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just gonna say that I like this. This is somewhat different because this is not with another person, but something I do on my own. I don't know if other people do this, but I not constantly, once I reach the point in a language where I feel like I can start outputting, I do lots of like talking to myself mentally. And I think this has helped. I mean, it's not something I like actively do. I just kind of, it's fun for me, so I do it. But I think
I'm
it's
also very big on
helpful
just talking to myself.
Yeah, just trying to make your interior monologue more this. And one thing I routinely do, just happen to do, it's not like I really, it's more that I realized I noticed myself doing this, is that I pretend I'm having an interview with someone as if like, oh, how'd you learn this language? What motivated you? Blah, blah, blah. Also because that's a question that's asked very often, especially if you're learning a language that's lesser studied. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I think there's a lot of merit to doing that.
That harkens back to one thing that we recommend doing, which is preparing that small talk. Because as a learner of a language, even a bigger language, people are going to be like, why are you studying this? And they're going to ask you, every speaker, when you meet them and they want to know about you, they're going to ask you the same few questions. How long have you been learning? How have you been learning? Why have you been learning? And people are curious. So we definitely recommend practicing things over and over and over again, sort of doing like spaced repetition with your output. Because it can be hard. It can be hard to innovate an answer in real time. Even if I were to ask you in English, right? If I started just asking right now in English, tell me about your Italian. Tell me this, and this. And
I don't speak it.
You know, it would be. I'm talking to Alex, so it would be difficult to just sort of free flow that. Now, obviously, you've had that conversation many times. People have said, "Alex, why did you learn Italian?" And you've given your answer. But imagine that's the first time you're being asked. And not only are you being asked, you're being asked in your second language. You're being asked in Italian or French.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I wanted to comment on, and this is part of the reason I think why my subconscious decided that, oh, it would be good to rehearse this scenario because it's probably helpful. One thing that was just commented on was how Language Simp says to speak from day one. I think a lot of us can agree that that's probably not the best idea, because you won't be able to self-correct because you don't have like a accurate model of the language, so you'll be kind of shooting in the dark. But it's okay if you're with someone else and they're correcting you, but still it's just not that efficient in the beginning. But I recently encountered this channel, or rather Isaac sent him to me, or reminded me of him, this Chinese learner named Will Hart, who has ostensibly really good Mandarin Chinese, and basically he did like lots of output, and it seems like either he's underestimating all the time it took to get to his level, because he says like maybe 1K hours or something, but he never tracked. But basically his situation was he was learning Chinese during COVID because he needed a new hobby, and where he was when he moved to school in Manchester, there was a bunch of Chinese exchange students there, and like not a bunch of other people at the time because of COVID for some reason. And basically he was just surrounded by Mandarin natives all the time, and like he was like pretty go-getter with actually trying to practice and speak, and I think it paid off. So I guess for me, what has worked is just like really waiting. With Italian, it feels like, and this is something too that I think would be really good to talk about, because I know Matt's talked about this before too, is that even if you wait a very long time to output, sometimes there are certain people who just like still can it's still difficult for them to start outputting, and like they make very basic grammatical mistakes, etc. And at some point, I know Matt himself said this for himself. He like waited too long to start outputting, and I think there's always that trap to fall in too. And again, it depends on people's goals, but my personal opinion is that people who say, okay, I'm just going to learn a language and never output, I don't think, first of all, I think that's kind of just wrong. But even if they think that, I don't think they're going to be of that opinion forever. I think that hopefully, eventually, they'll come to the conclusion that, okay, I'm building a communication skill, and I'm basically not getting the full experience if I'm not, having an exchange, a conversation with another person. And it's really enriching. I think that at some point, to take another example, and I know I'm kind of hogging up this audio space here, but there's also this French learner that comes to mind who has done like an insane amount of input. I think I've told Toast about them before. Their name's In Search of Lost Words, and they have they just reached like 7K hours. Yeah. This I think about this a lot, and they haven't started outputting, but they have 7K hours of like pure input, and they read like a crazy amount, but they also do plenty of listening. They have like really, really, what I would assume is really, really good comprehension. But in my opinion, they're at the point where they really have diminishing returns from their input, even when they expose themselves to harder text and stuff like that. And I think I could be totally missing this, but I think they passed the C2 test like 3,000 hours ago. Like they're very competent, but they just haven't started outputting. And I think that's too bad, because even if you're saying, okay, well, I don't see the point because I don't need it in my immediate life, you would actually learn a lot more about the language at that point from outputting, because you would realize all the kind of grammatical patterns, word usages, and especially pronunciation quirks that you haven't internalized yet through trying to output. I think
it's really interesting what you can see and skip over when you're just doing input. Mm-hmm. For example, the gender of the words. People learning a Romance language, you can reliably understand who is doing what to whom, and not internalize what gender a noun is.
I got hit by that hard.
And I've actually seen this. I've got a client who is now onto the listening phase where they've got 5,000 words. So with our coaching program, we get people up to 5,000 root words. So a root word would be like go, goes, going, went. We limitize it. That's just one word. And we've been giving the number 5,000. And I've got people who are now catching their listening up to their reading ability. And when they go and they do something like Quizzic or another sort of grammar-based study tool, they still have to drill in the A1 and the A2 grammar. And that's not at all uncommon with what I've seen with the coaching clients.
I think even with me, I ended up getting to a point where I would fail the A1 test because I don't know the gender of some word, and I would pass the B2 grammar test because they assume I know the gender at that point.
Yeah, I think the CFR scales are it's just a completely different progression of expectations that you can't really measure it if you're learning primarily through immersion. Because I remember, I think I even looked at a workbook at a bookstore once of Italian grammar questions. It was for A2, and I was like, these aren't easy. This is what you acquire last. And I think this is usually the case of this is the argument that what you learn in school first is what you acquire last through immersion, like gender, In English, I've heard the s at the end of words like as plurals or like just subject verb agreement and stuff like that. It's not easy, and I think also it's interesting because this In Search of Lost Words person also did a lot of grammar study at some point, but they basically ended up saying that it really for them wasn't worth it, and that they could have just done the same thing with more input. I think grammar, my take, I mean, again, everyone uses grammar differently. A lot of people like to use grammar to prime their immersion so they can pick up patterns more or notice patterns quicker than they usually would, and then therefore acquire them quicker is the idea. I think you can do that. I personally am very lazy and maybe not the best example to follow, but I've never ever studied grammar, and at least with comprehension, I've never had problems. And if I ever make a grammatical mistake, I'll just talk with Italian here because that's my most competent language. I usually don't say something and like have no idea if I like messed up. I'm either like more certain about the phrase or I'm like less certain. But still, that doesn't mean my grammar is perfect. It's like there's always improvement there. And I think for me personally, where I'm at, it's like I think I have fairly strong comprehension. I don't have much output practice at all, like really maybe under 10 hours. I mean, I had this one time where I had dinner with these Italian people, and that was 7 hours, but yeah.
Ethan says that you need about 150 hours of output to even start getting comfortable. And that's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. I mean, it depends what you're saying by comfortable, because interestingly, with Italian, even though I have little to no output, I think I can output actually fairly okay. Like I feel fairly comfortable, and I don't trip on my tongue too much. Of course, more limited than I want, and you know, it's I think the hardest thing for me, the first time I ever really tried outputting, it was a very awkward situation. Maybe I've explained this to a few other people. I was at my school, my university. They had this Italian conversation cafe, something I tried to start like a year or two earlier, but like that didn't pick up because there was no one interested. But then it was started by this actually Italian native, who's from Italy, and anyways, he was hosting like a little like you could drop by for an hour and like practice your Italian, but it was mainly meant for students of Italian who are taking Italian classes, which they only offered like the intro classes, like not even A1, A2, just 100, 101 basically. And so we ended up having a conversation, but it was very awkward. I was very nervous, of course, because this was basically my first time talking to someone. I didn't know them at all. It was just me and him in a room, and I had never practiced small talk, and it didn't even occur to me that, oh, I've only immersed with listening to people, friends talk to each other, people who already know each other, so they don't have to do this like weird introductory stuff, or not just introductory phrases. This like game that you have to play with someone when you're first talking to them, of starting polite, or what register of politeness do you start with, and that's different in different languages that have, especially the formal you and stuff like that. So you have to use different grammar, and then how does that change over time, and like what things are okay to bring up, and just a lot of things that like I only with hindsight I was like, man, I should have like prepared better. Or there's just so much to consider in like an interaction. Like it's complicated. So yeah, 150 hours sounds like a good marker.
That's precisely why we recommend grinding and practicing that small talk introductory stuff. Because if you have immersed 1,000 hours, 2,000 hours in your target language, and 99% of that was fantasy, you may have a very large vocab. That's great. But do you have what it takes to do those little almost fixed sort of formulaic conversations? So that's actually step one of our excuse me, of our output curriculum, is grinding that, practicing it. Because again, people experience what you experienced, Alex, where, hey, I've actually don't know how to properly like handle these introductory conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I generally approached it a lot more spontaneously, where for a while I would just go join a voice chat that was in German and I would just quietly listen. At the start, just to get used to like listening to actual speech and not just shows or scripted content. And then generally how I got myself up to speed is that I would be muted in these calls and then like kind of making my own sentences as part of these conversations and building up that own little library of things that I could be saying if I were actually taking part. And then eventually I just turn off the mute and I'm participating in the conversation, maybe a bit slower, but that's how I approached it as opposed to trying to grind a specific conversation.
Yeah.
It also ended up building a lot of endurance where I ended up going into conversations for multiple hours from the start, I think.
So what are
Maybe
y'all's
it's-
takes on the amount of writing versus speaking? One thing that shocked me initially with Ethan's plan to get people to output the Refold way was the amount of writing we have people do. And retrospectively, I did a whole bunch of it on like Tandem and Hello Talk myself, but a little bit less formulaic with less of a plan. I just wanted to chat to people. But a lot of that chatting was done via text, where I did have time to do lookups and to get corrections. So, do you all have any strong opinions on the amount of writing versus speaking that you should be doing when you do make that output transition?
I think that there's a something that I've been seeing a lot in the community, that I think that listening doesn't matter to some people. Like, if they don't plan to work on their speaking, they probably don't care about listening as well. And it seems to me that there's like a huge part of the community that only cares about like reading, not even writing even. So like I don't know, like it depends on your goals, I guess.
I think for me, it's a lot more spoken output. Like I did some writing output at the start to get started and to kind of find those spots where like I don't know the word for, I don't know, apple or whatever. But once I got past that, I basically am only doing speaking nowadays, with maybe minor exceptions.
Yeah, for me, I think it really is preference. Because I think one of the most important things in starting to output is to like not be too worried to be in an. I know Crashin talks about being in an environment where it's low stress. You feel like you can make mistakes and whatnot. So whatever that environment is helps. That being said, of course, speaking is a lot more complex because there's the whole mouth muscle movement thing, which basically needs to be trained in a way. It's like, I think of it almost like as if you were playing an instrument. I play drums, and it's like I think of it in that same way where it's like you kind of need to like practice certain sounds that are just necessarily not there as much because you have influence from your native language. But yeah, no, if speaking is, well, again, it depends on how much you care about accent. And now I'm kind of losing the thread here. What was I trying to say? Oh yeah, I know. So this Indian woman who in Portuguese, she was very big on doing this writing streak thing. So Reddit, there's subreddit for certain languages where you post like a daily. The idea is to post you writing something in the language, describing whatever, talking about whatever, daily, and you have a streak, and then basically you get natives to correct it, and that helped her a lot. And I think that idea appealed to me a lot at first. A lot of people, I don't know if it was Refold or maybe it was just Matt at some point said definitely start with writing because it's just more simple. Sorry, but I don't know. For me personally, I like speaking. I like outputting. I can't do what Toast did, which is like lurk in VCs and then jump in, and that's like so anxiety inducing for me. Also, it's like I want to talk to the right person, I guess. This plays into the idea of small talk. It's like I don't want to be in a situation where I'm forced into like small talk and not getting anywhere with the person. If we're in a community where, say, I'm really into chess, and okay, I'm on a chess server that I don't know, say I'm learning German and I'm really into chess, and then people are in a VC talking about chess, and then I can join and we can talk about certain things, and it's even better because I'll probably have immersed in that kind of content before, as an example. So it's like then it makes it even easier. I know Femto is like is big into like seiyuu, like voice actors in Japan, and like things like otaku related or anime related. So it's like if you have something that you're passionate about, I think it's good to connect with people who have similar interests, because it also facilitates communication that way. Because you've probably heard people talk about this before since you've immersed with it before. But for me, I like to do IRL immersion, which is hard, which is why I haven't done much in Italian. But it's why I'm focusing on French right now, because I have family to like actually practice with. And yeah, I don't know. For me, it's more fun. It's more, for me, it signals to my brain more that the language is really important, especially if I see the person in front of me speaking. Also, some weird thing I had with Italian, I've probably talked about this before, is like for me, I had like no exposure to it IRL until I was already like high comprehension, and then I like I haven't been back to Italy, but I was in Iceland. I was on vacation, and then I heard like some Italian speaking, and it was very surreal. It was like, wow, this is like a real language that people speak. This is like I've heard other people talk about this. This is a very strange effect that takes a while to like undo itself. Like there's just like shock of like, whoa, like this is a real thing. I'm like, this has, it's not just me and my screen. It's like, it's me and this whole other, this people live their whole lives in this language. And that's why in a way you have to like respect it. But
that's pretty common with people. If they spend most of their time immersing with the language, and like it only lives in anime and comic books, right? Realizing that people actually speak the language can be trippy. But yeah, I think that not having your writing surpass your speaking is something to be careful about. Because especially with refolders, we tend to be the type of people who we hang out in like chat rooms, Discord. We like our internet culture, right? Twitter, things like that. And it is easier to get started outputting via text. But at some point, if your goal is to speak, you will have to practice the speaking. And getting that ratio right, I'm not sure there is an answer. The biggest tip that I have is talking to yourself. Someone put in chat that they like to imagine that they're a YouTuber, and that's great. If you're watching something, you can imagine that you're doing a reaction YouTube video to it, and you're talking about it, like what's going on, describing things and your reaction. And that's a great way to actually practice on your own. As for what the optimal ratio is, I don't know if there is an optimal ratio, really. Beyond speak more than you write, which is easier said than done.
Yeah, I think I like that. I think that there's also just kind of, with writing, it's good to improve at specific things if you know what you want to work on and you have this idea that you can work on. So if it's something like, I don't know, gender is going to always be my example in German, but you can always just look that up if you need it. With speaking, I feel like there's this level of improvisation that you end up learning, and like when you inevitably forget the word, then you have to learn how to just describe the word or find some way to roll out of that fall instead of just kind of saying, oh, I don't know the word, and pausing everything. And I think that kind of takes building up in spoken output to get really good at. At least it was in my case. And I think that it might be helpful if one day I do end up going to my target language country and I end up in a conversation where I don't know what to say, and then I have this skill that I'm building of just knowing a thing to say, even if I can't find the exact right words.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the interesting thing with actually having a speaker when you're conversing is if they're a sympathetic native speaker, they can adapt to you You know, they can rephrase things if you didn't quite hear it. And this happens in our native languages too. Like if we're in a busy place and I say, hey, Gabrielle, hand me that thing. And he's like, what thing? I'm like, the pin. You're like, the what? And then like I pantomime what a pin is, right? Like a pantomime writing. And he's like, the pin. So that can be also a big sort of mind sort of boggling thing to happen when you're used to like only immersing in media, right? Where it doesn't adapt to you versus having a sympathetic speaker where, you know, if you forget the word, you can say, the thing that you used to write with it has ink. You know, you can sort of circumlocute in ways in output that you can't do with input. Because if you don't know the word, you don't know the word, right? When you're listening.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's that black and white. I think context can give you an idea, or if the word itself has, like it sounds similar to a word you know before, or if it has a root that's you may know. But yeah. But generally, it is more, I don't know, tricky to know.
I think it's kind of tricky because coming from input where if you don't understand something, it's just kind of gone, then I get into conversations and someone says something that makes no sense, and then I just don't say anything about it because I'm used to it. And then eventually they're like, so what do you think about that? I'm like, that's a great question.
So I'm curious here, Gabrielle, Looney, you are taking this sort of ALG approach. You've become an ALG teacher. You've got your YouTube channel teaching Portuguese. What is the ALG mindset on the amount of on writing versus speaking? I imagine they would take a very speaking heavy approach, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think most of the ALG people, they just start by speaking, which is something I regret not doing. With ALG, we see this phenomenon where, at least for me, like people, they seem to have the most of the articulation down pat, but the rest is not there. So like, kind of sounds like a native accent from a place that does not exist from the country of your target language, if that makes sense. And usually, like, for example, AOG, they usually teach Thai. The students who have the best accent are usually students that come from a similar culture. So there's no, in my opinion, like there's no, they don't know how to approach speaking in AOG. They sort of just hope for the best, and that's it.
Interesting. So they sort of hope that if you get enough input that's comprehensible, you'll eventually just be able to start speaking.
They sort of just wait for you to sort of have the
I'm
right
not sure
background.
I've found that to be the case with refolders, but maybe it works with people doing ALG with tons and tons of comprehensible audiovisual input. Because we do take a very reading-heavy approach here, right? Where we have you doing lookups with Yomi-chan and having same language subtitles.
It's limited in AOG, I can say that. It's like many times, like people are perceiving the right thing, but they don't know if it is the right thing, basically. So it's complicated. I don't think they know how to approach it yet. They sort of like expect that suddenly you will have the right background to perceive whatever you need to perceive or whatever. But usually, yes, like because of when you take a listening heavy approach, like you're basically doing lots of your training, so you will certainly end up better. But it's limited, let's say, the way they approach it.
Interesting. So, when it comes to corrections, what do you guys feel like the correct amount of corrections is? I personally don't think corrections are useful if you don't do something about them. If you don't make note of them and then revisit them later. I think if you correct somebody just in a casual conversation, they're going to forget it just a couple seconds later. So this is again where I think writing shines, because you can revisit your errors, and you can even, if you write something the wrong way and you get it corrected by a native, you can go back and put that into your Anki deck as the correct way to say something. Whereas just having free conversation and getting corrections without having the tutor write something down or without recording the session, I don't think is super duper useful.
I think you should, like, you asked me on my interview how I got good at writing. And I sort of found out why, I think. What I did was I just created the right conditions for my growth to happen by itself. What I mean is, I developed a model of the language, and no one, pretty sure everyone agrees with this, no one can correct yourself faster than yourself. Faster, by the way. So like, I could self-correct as I was going, and I was constantly readjusting what I was doing to eventually, like, every time that I took action, I was having growth. I was learning what to do, what not to do, and increasing my perception. So it's like, I don't know if corrections are valuable. Like, there's a place for them, but like, it's very, very like, you know, the type of corrections you get at Grammarly, or for your instructor in the, what's the name of that exam?
TOEFL?
No.
IELTS?
No, the SAT. Like someone who's going to correct your grammar for the SATs or something. That type of stuff. That's what I think.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between correcting the grammar of the language and then correcting things like formatting and punctuation and things. And that's a whole other skill. You know, can you speak a language is different can you be an educated writer in the language.
Absolutely. I also think pronunciation corrections are very different.
Oh, what do you think about pronunciation corrections?
Just that they're, I think you can start doing that relatively early. So one thing that was eye-opening for me is I tried this for the first time, maybe in July. I want to get back into this. I probably should just jump into it. Corrected reading. So I would like read something in French. This was, and then I'd have my cousin he's like, yeah, sure, I'll help you with that. And I had to like double check a bunch. I'm like, are you sure you like? I feel bad like using people, but no, he was more than happy to like to really be hard on my pronunciation, say, oh, that sounded kind of weird, and then we would go back and forth of like me trying to pronounce a sound, then him saying it correctly, and then me saying it. He's like, oh, maybe do this, and yeah, that was super helpful. It realized I was perceiving two sounds that I thought I had down, like slightly off, and maybe that would have gotten corrected with more input, but it was very good that I was like, okay, here's how I think it's said, and then hearing like, oh no, that sounds to his native ear, that sounds off. And even though you think you have a really good ear, it's slightly different. Even if you have very high comprehension, certain phonemes, I don't know, native ears, it's OP. But I also want to say, I think corrections in speech, okay, I think corrections in general, I think, okay, memory for me is like, we just remember things better if they're more emotionally charged. And if you get a correction that like, you like, for better, for worse, you beat yourself up about, you're like, dude, how could I have made that mistake? That's like so embarrassing. Or maybe there's, you know, a lot of people talk about like, say with Mandarin, for example, where there's tones, if you get the tone wrong, people might think you say something else. And if there's like some like really embarrassing misunderstanding, you're going to remember that very well. And if it's a small correction, but it's like for you, it's a big event. But if you're like, if you say if you like conjugate the verb wrong, and the person corrects you, and then you don't think twice about it, you're like, oh yeah, sorry, whatever. Then you probably won't remember that as well. So I agree. But I think it's just important to put yourself in situations where you don't need to be corrected that much. I mean, of course, there's always going to be some amount of it, but this is why I think like correction through writing can be more helpful. But and also why I think shadowing maybe or like memorizing speech and like just replicating exactly how a native speaks could also be an effective strategy. But I don't have that much experience with those things, so I can't really comment on it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about your ear and thinking you said it the right way and then you didn't. I ran into this recently. We're working on a spelling deck for English, for people learning English, and it's mapping certain spellings to the sounds that can be represented by that spelling. And not a single person on the team really speaks purely standard textbook American English. So it was interesting talking with our in-house linguist and talking with Ben and actually going over some things. And, you know, I had it pointed out to me that I did certain things strangely beyond what I already knew I did weird. And that's in my own language. I didn't notice that I said the vowel in the word palm or ball a little bit weird compared to standard general American.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Even if you think you have a really good ear, even in your native language, you don't always notice what sound you think you're producing and the sound you actually produce. There's always a little bit of a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
I think related to getting corrections, and particularly with like remembering corrections, I think that Skypon was right that it's generally better if you remember a correction, and I definitely remember a couple of them. But I think that part of that is that there's kind of this competing balancing weight where the more corrections you get just in general, that's going to make you more aware of the types of mistakes you make, and that's going to improve you. But then get too many and you're going to forget about them. So what I found works for me really well is just getting individual periods of very high amounts of corrections. And like for a while it was every 2 months I would do some dedicated output practice with someone who knew a thing or two about German, and I would ask them what I did wrong, and I would collect this list of like 15 to 20 things, and those would be my focuses for my next 2 months of input and output practice and all of that. And then I would go to the next one, and then I would get another list of 10 or so things and continue with that for a while. And that made my output okay. I remember reading this one study that looked at, like, with correction frequency, is it better to focus on one thing or to just get everything corrected? And it actually found that between a group that had one specific kind of mistake corrected and a group that had all of the mistakes corrected, the one that had all the mistakes corrected ended up doing better, even in the thing where the one group had the one mistake being corrected. It was articles or something, and then the study showed that people who got everything corrected also did better on articles than the group that only got articles corrected.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was just going to comment too that it's also been my experience that when I've done corrected reading, like I feel like I don't need to do it for very long because you'll encounter your errors fairly quickly, especially if you're just reading like normal language out loud. I was reading from a manga, so it was kind of like sort of slice of lifey, and yeah, it was interesting too because there's always things that that you're like somewhat certain about. You're like, wait, do you say it this way, or am I just making this up? And usually your first instinct's right. But yeah, no, I felt like after that I was like, okay, like now I need to go input and like actually like hear this a bunch more and like recorrect, you know, my model of this. And it's been the same every time I've outputted. Like I had like one really, really intensive output thing with Italian, and it felt good, but it felt like, okay, I'm basically at my limit of how well I can output now. Now I feel like I have a lot more to look toward in my input and what I can improve. And this is the thing too, I think not much is talked about when I feel like people talk about input as as if it was this one thing, where in reality it's so multifaceted, especially if you're doing like just listening or audiovisual input. It's like you can focus either on meaning and kind of let like the specific sounds fall into the background, or focus on like catching every little sound and checking yourself mentally, like, oh, can I reproduce what's being said here? I think that's a really good strategy too. Or just focusing even on the cadence. Like, there's so much you can kind of work on, and this is why I feel like language is like it's a big time sink, but it's just like endless. It's just like you can always improve something, I feel.
For sure. And we are actually nearing the end of the, but before we go, do you guys have any thoughts about how to best use like a language partner? I personally have had the best success making friends in my target language rather than trying to make a language partner. And if you do want a language partner, just hire a tutor. That's been the most successful thing for me, because at the end of the day, people, it's going to be lopsided. They're not going to give you the same sort of dedicated feedback that a tutor would give you. So you can certainly make a friend in the target language, but do not expect that friend to be your tutor. Actually go and get a tutor for that.
Yeah, for a while, like, I did the language partner thing, but eventually I realized that I kind of just have to split up my German friends and my German tutors, because eventually your language gets to a level where when you ask what's wrong with it, they don't actually give you an answer. It's like a lot of very small things, and then it stops being like, at first, when I first started, it was like there were very obvious things where it was like, oh yeah, you're doing this wrong. But eventually it's like, once your language gets good enough, then it becomes that they're just going to say, it sounds off, or they're going to tell you some generic thing, and you're going to be like, what does that mean? And they're going to be like, I don't know. So then I found that it's better to just split up talking to friends in the language and then actually getting like improvements from someone who knows what they're talking about.
For sure. And compensating them for their time, right? Because
yeah, exactly.
It is
my
work,
money.
right, at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And it's a skill set to actually be able to pick out things.
Definitely. I don't have that much experience with language partners. The only language exchange partners I've had were on Tandem, and that was for crosstalk. I was specifically doing this in languages that I wasn't ready to output in. So, but I still wanted to have like kind of a conversation with a person. And yeah, I do agree that to me it makes sense to split the friends and corrected like the tutors apart. But like, I think regardless, like, just this whole human interaction thing of like having a friend in the language is like a big thing. It makes you feel more a part, like more in the club.
Absolutely.
Of like, okay, you know, the culture, the I don't know, it's more fun. It's less you're in your bubble of immerser, and you kind of inch you inch closer toward, okay, just a speaker of this language who functions and hangs out and lives their life in the language, which I think is really the end goal.
For sure. You know, the identity shift from being a learner of the language to just being a speaker of the language.
Yeah.
Okay, and we got a question from the chat. What do you guys think about the idea of trying to exaggerate the pronunciation before trying to dial it in? I've heard some people recommend this.
I've heard that too.
I think it's fine, but like sometimes people get results, but they don't know how or they got those results.
I would be worried about thinking I'm exaggerating the sound than actually making it. Like if you're learning a language like Spanish, where the single flap ra and the trill ra are two different phonemes, it's important not to go ra 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 and think that you're practicing the single tap, because ultimately you're not. So that's sort of what I would worry about, is maybe practicing the wrong sound, you know, or I don't know. One thing I've been told when I speak Filipino is I sound like a newscaster. You know, my cadence,
Really?
my pronunciation. Yeah. And that's not the worst thing. It means I'm understandable, but I do think it means I don't necessarily sound native, right? And I think that could be the result of too careful practice with my output.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I've also heard the exaggerated pronunciation thing. I think that the way that I kind of interpret it, or what I was told at the start and that I've kind of taken to heart, is to use songs as my method of doing exaggerated pronunciation, because then you're not going to have natives that are like doing that mistake with the ra versus ra if they're a native speaker and they know that they're different sounds. But
Yeah, I would be careful with songs because again, some things are totally different when sung, right?
sure.
You know, you got the stereotypical indie girl voice, or a good example with be like everybody's heard Rammstein, right? And when the Rammstein lead singer is singing, he uses an alveolar trill, ra ra ra. When most spoken
Same
German
thing
does
happens
not
in
have
French,
that.
yeah.
So I would be careful modeling my pronunciation off of singing.
Yeah, I think that getting a variety of artists would help a lot with that. But I also think that you get the repetition out of it, and it is kind of exaggerated, and you are going to have a lot of chances to work on a specific word, even if you just listen to a song enough.
Yeah, I completely
Singing can be wild, man. Can you imagine if you're learning like British English and you're like, oh, who are you immersing in? I'm immersing in, you know, and you give a British band and half of them sing with an American accent, right?
I think we can all agree that the flaps and trills are more metal than ha.
Maybe. Depends. I wanted to say that I think exaggerating is helpful for people who have this mental block of not wanting to sound native. They feel like uncomfortable, like they're almost imitating, but they in a way you need to kind of. It's like an ego thing. It's like an identity thing. Like I remember Ian from Korean Patch. His Korean was like only understandable, only comprehensible to his girlfriend for a while, and this was because he was. I suppose he just had an accent or wasn't really trying to imitate how real Koreans sound because he didn't see himself as a part of that club. That's my guess. And once he, and for a while he was just starting to imitate, you know, stuff he saw on dramas or TV for fun, and he basically ended up in the situation where he accidentally did that in front of other people. Then in a restaurant. Then he left to go somewhere. He's like, oh my god, what did I do? And they came back, they're like, wow, your Korean's never been better. Or I've also heard like students of French who have a lot of trouble pronouncing stuff, and then where did I read this? I don't remember. But they come back on the exam day with like a baguette and a beret, and all exaggerating everything, but they sound a lot better than they usually do. So I think it's good in that situation. But if you're already at the point in the language where you have a strong sense of what's overdoing it, then just don't overdo it. I think there's a difference between enunciating things and overdoing it. I think it's good to be able to like enunciate words correctly or like and stuff like that, because I think speaking quickly is always the harder part. So I don't know. It's also a question of that. But yeah, that's my take.
My take is that whenever people are trying to exaggerate, imitate, impersonate, whatever, they're mostly just playing with resonance. So like, they're probably not gonna get the results they want like all the time because they don't even know the medium they are using to get those results. So like, it will be like anecdotal. Like they would talk about it as if it's magic or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I think most of the people are not interested in that stuff. So
Sure. Yeah. And we've sparked this debate in the chat about speaker identity, and that could be a whole thing. Really, that could be a whole episode of the Refold and Friends Roundtable podcast, because you know, your identity in your L2, you know, that is a whole thing, right? If you move to a city and you sound like you're from a different city in that same country, and then you live there for 10 years and you still don't sound like you're from that city, it could totally affect your life and your well-being in that city and how you're perceived. We were talking about Ian from Korean Patch, who apparently has a very good regional accent in his Korean. He's repping his city, and I think that's totally fine. To have the identity of like, oh, where you've moved to,
Totally.
and how most people speak. Okay, guys, we are at the end of our hour. Thank everybody for coming. I thank the listeners. I thank the panel. We have Alex, we have Toast, we have Gabrielle, and it was fantastic. I'm going to start doing more of these with a little bit more notice, probably at the tempo of once a month. So keep an eye out if you enjoy listening to the podcast. Keep an eye out if you want to be part of the panel or you want to ask questions in the future. I think this is going to be a regular thing, and I look forward to hosting them.
Thank you for having us, Clayton.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join and chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.
Hey, as you know, there's a lot of language learning advice out there, which can make it kind of overwhelming and difficult to actually get going on your own learning. If you feel like you're struggling to figure out language learning, you're not alone. It's an extremely complicated process with tons of different steps. If you're looking for a step-by-step guide to create the perfect language learning routine for you, then you have to check out our new course. We spent thousands of hours designing a simple and straightforward process that you can use to create your own personalized language routine that actually works. We understand that every learner is different and that you have to roll with the punches and adapt. Every day for 30 days, I walk you through everything you need to know to build an effective learning routine, no matter your circumstances. We give you the advice and resources you need to ensure your success, so you don't have to waste time looking for stuff to do and can focus on learning. And if any questions do come up, don't worry. We are always there to answer any questions and clear up confusion. And it's all backed by our 90-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. If, for whatever reason, something's not quite working for you, we insist you get every penny back. It's time for you to stop wishing that you could learn a second language. It's time to become the master of your language learning journey. Check out the link below to get instant access and start your journey today.